So welcome everybody to our February 2023 Climate Cafe, where we are featuring journalist Bruno Toledo to talk about Brazil's new political trajectory and policies to address the climate crisis in Brazil, the future of the Amazon, the lungs of our planet. We are delighted to have him here to teach us about what's been going on there, how it parallels also interesting events as well in the United States, and the meetings with the White House with Lula, the newly elected or re-elected president. I'd like to turn it. I am Dana Freeling, the chair of the Environment and Climate Crisis Council. And I would like to turn it over to Sam Goodman now in Costa Rica to introduce Bruno to us. We're so thrilled to have you here today. This is such an important topic for us to be able to discuss and learn from you and each other. So take it away, Sam.
Sure. So Bruno has been one of my go-to sources for what's happening in Brazil, especially over the last 4 years under Bolsonaro and now with Lula in charge. So Bruno Toledo Hisamoto, he's an environmental journalist and he holds a Ph.D. in international relations from the University of São Paulo in Brazil. His research focuses on the UNFCCC negotiation process, post-Cold War humanitarian crises, and Brazil's foreign policy on environmental issues. So he's a great person to talk about what's happening in Brazil today and what we can expect from this new and exciting administration. So turn it over to you, Bruno.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Dana. Thanks for the opportunity, for the invitation. And I say just forgive me for my English because it's been 4 months since COP27. What was the last time that I practiced to speak English a bit longer? So I ask sorry if I commit some mistakes, some error. I set up a presentation.
You just have to tell me next slide when you're ready to change.
Okay. So I set up this presentation. It's just to summarize some points that we need to talk about. But first, to say about this analogy, the Brazilian phoenix. The last 4 years were incredibly hard for us in Brazil, especially in the environmental and human rights communities. So the destruction that Bolsonaro left behind it's unbearable. It's something that we are still dealing, and I think we will need to deal over the next, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. So Brazilian Phoenix is what we expect to be, with leaving the ashes of the Bolsonaro era, the destruction, the chaos that he left behind, and hoping bringing the green hopes that Lula represents for us, and to make us, in fact, contribute to the global fight against climate change and against environmental crisis. You can go the next. Well, to talk about the current situation in Brazil, we need to have an historic focus, an historic perspective. Environmental discussions in Brazil is something quite recent. Historically speaking, we had the military dictatorship era from the 60s to the 80s. It was a time quite violent here in Brazil, and environment discussions in that time was they saw the environment as an obstacle to the economic development. And in this context, the focus of the military dictatorship government in the Amazon, they saw the Amazon as a green desert to be occupied. They didn't recognize the indigenous communities, the people that live there, They just saw the trees, the sea of green trees. And for them, it was just the last big pool of natural resources that we need, that the world has, and they needed to be occupied, they needed to be protected against international interests. So, and I don't know, the Transamazonic and Agrovilla project, it's something quite, it's a project that the government wanted to construct, build a highway in the middle of the jungle to integrate the Amazon to the rest of the country. The project was something for more than 1,000 kilometer long highway from the northeast state of Paraíba up to the border with Peru. So it was something like a huge project, billions and billions of dollars expensive. But the Amazon region, especially the soil in the Amazon, it's quite difficult, because you have the first 1 or 2 feet of the soil, of the top of the soil, the upper soil, is where the rich soil is, the rich soil that brings us the forest. And to make and above this, you have something like a sand-like soil. So to build something in the sand-like soil, it's impossible. But this show how the government didn't know the Amazon. They didn't know how was the climate, the situation, the environmental of the Amazon. So I don't need to say that the project was a completely failure. We spent billions and billions of dollars in this project, and that in a road that leads nothing to nowhere. In this context, you still have the persecutions against indigenous peoples, especially because some of these groups were related to left-wing groups in the fight against the military dictatorship, especially in the Araguaia region. And we have the land conflict situation, since the government bring a lot of people from other parts of Brazil to the Amazon region. They created a situation where you have traditional communities, traditional peoples. Their land was contested, the land was occupied, and that caused a lot of violence, a lot of conflict. One quite, I think, recognizable example, including in the international context, was the murder of Chico Mendes. He was the leading environmentalist in Brazil in the 1980s, and he was murdered in 1988 because of land conflict. And of course, deforestation. When the military dictatorship ended in the middle of the 1980s, we have a situation where the rate of deforestation in the Amazon, the annual deforestation rate in the Amazon was something like 15,000 kilometers a year, square kilometers a year destructed. So just to compare, Bolsonaro was the highest rate of the last 2 decades. His rate was 10,000 kilometers, square kilometers yearly. You can pass to next, please. So the discussion of environment in Brazil borns with the redemocratization. The end of the military dictatorship, it created a situation where we can discuss environmental, not in this strategic military security sense, but as something that we needed to protect, that we needed to see with more careful approach. So we begin to see environmental protection as a condition for development in Brazil. We have the creation at the time, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, the creation of the Ministry of Environment. And the IBAMA is the leading environmental agency responsible for fight against deforestation in Brazil. And deforestation was the issue since the beginning. As I said, the military dictatorship ended, left a situation quite terrible in the Amazon. And the government wanted to deal with this at the time. The democratic government wanted to deal with that. And this was one of the issues that Brazil focused on, the organization of the ECO 92 or Rio 92, which was the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development here in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. But in a sense, the discussions about the environment and up until the transition to the 2000s, environmental issues were the backseat of the public discussion here in Brazil, because our focus at the time were on the economic and political situation. We were consolidating democracy in the 90s in Brazil, so to have environment as a public issue discussion in Brazil is something quite recent, something for the 20 years ago. You can pass to the next, please. Well, and that brings us to the first Lula government in the 2000s. Lula was the first president to put environment into the center of the agenda. At the time, it was something not center, something. It was a discussion that Lula allowed us to have, but the biggest asset for his government in the environmental discussions was Marina Silva. Her position as Minister of Environment, she came from the Amazon region. She has a history of environmental activism. So when she went to the Ministry of Environment, she focused on the issue of deforestation, how to effectively combat deforestation, how we can increase protection in the Amazon. And her most important project at the time was a new strategy of command and control actions for environmental protection in the Amazon. It's something quite interesting, because at that time we didn't have much of. We had some monitoring from satellite, but it was not something systemic. It was not something that was organized and connected with the teams on the ground. So the first issue, the first thing that she did on the government was to bring this technological task for the teams on the ground, to have satellite monitoring, giving the information where deforestation was happening. Yes, please. Thank you. Where deforestation was happening, this information goes to the teams on the ground, and they act in a quick fashion. So the systemic result was we had we have the deforestation rate down 80% between 2006 and 2012. It's something historical for us. I think in 2005, the rate of deforestation were something like 12,000 square kilometers. And in 2012 was something like 3,000 or 4,000. So it was a very effective strategy that she helped implemented on the first Lula government. Over the next, please. But then again, we had economic and political issues putting environmental discussions on the backseat. The 2010s were, I think, not only in Brazil, worldwide, was a decade of instability, of conflict. We had, of course, the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff in 2016, that some people, including myself, see as a proxy coup d'etat, because she didn't commit anything wrong to be impeached, but her enemies in Congress, they had the power to do so, so they impeached her. But even during Dilma Rousseff's government, the economic situation resulted in budgetary cuts in the environmental budget. So inspections on the ground were cut. IBAMA, which is the leading agency in the fight against deforestation, they were restricted to make I forget the word, sorry, to bring new people to their force because of budgetary issues. And as a result, the deforestation rises again from 2012 on. And the government itself, because it needed pressure, it needed support from some agribusiness interests in Congress, they relaxed some environmental laws in Brazil, leading something that mobilized Brazil during last decade was the review of the forest code, which is conditions for deforestation, legal deforestation in some parts of the country, including the Amazon. And of course, the Belo Monte hydropower station, the Xigu River, which still is a catastrophe for indigenous peoples and the environment in the southern region of Pará. The next, please. Her successor, Michel Temer, which was her vice president, was something like a prequel to Bolsonaro. He was a right-wing politician, so he was beginning to dismantle something that some of the structure set up by Lula and Dilma in environmental inspections. The agribusiness sector got more power in his administration, and an issue that we dealt a lot in Brazil during Bolsonaro was the military involvement in environmental issues, which is something that Temer began in 2017 when he began to substitute IBAMA's team for army teams in the fight against deforestation. But IBAMA teams were trained to do this. Military were not. So you see that it's not something like a substitute, but more something like a useless remedy. Go to the next, please. Well, here's a guy, Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro still is a very interesting phenomena in the political science perspective, because he came from the military group, but he was not he was not a general, for example. He was a captain in the army, and he was expelled from the army because of non-obedient sorry, I
behavior.
yes. bad behavior in the context of the army. But since he left the army, he built a career in politics, mostly as a congressman, over 30 years as congressman in Brazil. Didn't present much projects, but he presented himself in the public, and this is the genius about him. He presented himself as the one man that can solve any problem. And this catch the interest, catch the support of a very interesting coalition of players that, and up until that point, were not mobilized politically. So he aligned with the military, the agribusiness, the land grabbers, and religious proselytizers, especially evangelicals communities in Brazil. These groups were not politically mobilized before Bolsonaro. And he brings these groups together and align them with his nationalist political agenda. And in the environmental discussions, he brings this the right-wing paranoia. You see, he resurrects the military dictatorship view of the Amazon as an asset to be protected, to be militarily protected, because of the United States interests, the European Union interests, the China interests in the Amazon. So we needed to protect this region from potential enemies abroad. At the same time, he sees the forest itself as a burden, something that we need to destruct, to extract the natural resources that we want, the gold that we want, the wood, the timber that we want, all the minerals that we want. And this brings us a project of effective destruction of the environment that he implemented, and it was something that we joke in Brazil. He didn't promise much, but the few things that he promised, he obliged. He has done. And one of the things that he promised and he has done was destruction of the environment. And this project, and we can summarize in 3 fronts: the legal, institutional, political, and social environmental. Go to the next, please. Legal institutional destruction. This is Ricardo Salles. He was the first environment minister of Bolsonaro government, and he was the leading man behind this project of destruction. So since Bolsonaro didn't have enough support in Congress to change environmental laws, Mr. Salles did something that was new in the context of public policies in Brazil. He did infralegal deregulation. So something like executive acts that the government itself can do. He did deregulate rules about, for example, the area of natural forests that you need to keep in your property in all over the country. He changed the rules related to public participations in environmental discussions. We had the CONAMA, it's Environmental National Council in Brazil, one of the bodies set up after the end of the military dictatorship, and it was something like 150 men, the people discussing environmental issues together with the government. He restricted this group to 50 people, and only 5 people, representatives of the social groups, of environmental groups, and in the civil society. So it's something. In practice, he closed the door to us in the discussions of environmental governance in Brazil in his administration. One example of these legal regulations were the conciliatory audiences that he set up on the execution of environmental fines. For example, when IBAMA goes to an area, the group identifies an illegal deforestation point. So the inspector gives a fine, but before the fine is implemented, it goes into the justice. You have an administrative process to process this fine, to see if the fine is correct, and this costs some time to go to process. And when he created the conciliatory audience, he created a phase that effectively freezes all the process of the environmental fines, because the fine cannot pass on before the okay of the conciliatory process. If the conciliatory process didn't give the okay, the fine cannot continue. In this process, we let billions and billions of reais, millions and millions of dollars in environmental fines expire during his government because of that. So you don't have the fine, the educational point of the fine were completely disappeared. Together with this infra-legal deregulation, we have the dismantling of the IBAMA. So the budget was cut in 90% in some years. So it was almost distracted at that point. Lack of personnel and equipment because of the freezing in hirings of the implemented over in the Temer administration. IBAMA was left without the possibility of hire personnel. And IBAMA is not an inspector of IBAMA don't get much money. So it's quite easy to go to another career, even in public service. So IBAMA closed in the end of the Bolsonaro administration. IBAMA was almost empty in personnel. And the few people that left in IBAMA were politically persecuted. So if you do your job, for example, if you go to a place and apprehend some equipments in gold digging areas, the law allows us to destruct this equipment. And Bolsonaro was quite adamant to say that he didn't want to destruct this equipment because in his opinion was unfair to the people that were committing the crime. So Bolsonaro prohibited IBAMA to destroy this mining machinery. And I think the most quite like behavior compared, for example, to Trump, was the denial of science data. So INPE is the most prestigious government scientific agency in Brazil, and it monitors the Amazon since the 1970s, and they are responsible to set up the deforestation rate in Brazil. And of course, the rates during the Bolsonaro era were terribly high, but the government Bolsonaro said that no, the data is false, it was fake news, it was a conspiracy of left-wing politicians and left-wing people inside INPE, inside IBAMA. So he attempted to set up a parallel system for deforestation monitoring led by his people, the military, to get the real data. Go to next, please. On the political destruction front, we have the unholy alliance between agribusiness, arms industry, and evangelicals, is the Beef Bulletin Bible Caucuses in the Brazilian Congress. And these coalition were quite strong on the last legislature in Brazil, and they helped the government to pass or to approve some quite worrisome projects in Congress. For example, mining in indigenous lands, relaxation of health requirements for pesticides, restriction to the limitation of new indigenous land, and even areas of any protected areas, and legalization of illegal occupation of public lands. So you see, it's almost like a legalization of all the crimes that were committed in the Amazon. This was his great project. Use of fake news on social media to discredit scientific data on deforestation. One example that it's almost funny if it were not dramatic in Brazil. We had a place in Pará, Alter do Chão, a beautiful place, and in 2020, it was in the middle of the pandemic. There was a huge fire in forest area near this city, and some players in social media around the government began to accuse Leonardo DiCaprio because he was financing a WWF project in Brazil, and the government accused WWF project of setting the fire to make the government look bad in international media. But I think it's ridiculous, but it's something that his people, the Bolsonarist people, they spread a lot on social media, and this fake news softened a little bit of the impact of the international pressure against the government. And Bolsonaro, one of the negative legacies that he left to us was international isolation. After Trump left the government in the United States, we didn't have any important ally abroad. So the last 2 years of his government, Brazil was effectively isolated from the international community, with no support whatsoever from Europe or other players or other important players abroad. Can go to the next, please. And of course, we had the social environmental destruction. This picture, I thought a lot about presenting or not. Last month, we had a situation in the Yanomami indigenous land, which was in fact just the end of a process that goes 2-3 years in the past. The Yanomami region is the largest indigenous reserve in Brazil, in the state of Roraima, in the northern part of our country. You have something like 30,000 to 40,000 indigenous people living there, together with 20,000 invaders that explore gold illegally in this area. And the gold mining people, they attack the indigenous communities. They try to buy the indigenous communities, buy their support, and they destruct all the infrastructure for example, healthcare for indigenous communities. So long story short, we had a situation where children and older people in indigenous communities with subnutrition. So it's something that we are still dealing up until this point. Lula government is trying to alleviate the situation, but this is the human face of the Bolsonaro era, is what he left us. He left us this destruction, the human destruction. Brazil is the world's most lethal country for environmentalists and indigenous rights defenders. And over the last decade, but especially over the last 4 years, we have 342 dead. The leading country in the world in this case. We had an increasing number of cases of violence against indigenous people. The Indigenous Missionary Council, the CIMI, which covers this data annually, they recognize 176 cases of violent death among indigenous peoples, the second worst rate since 2014. This was in 2021. We don't have yet the numbers for 2022. And the complete lack of interest in the care of indigenous populations. Bolsonaro repeatedly said, compared indigenous as primitive people, sometimes as animals. So to see these photos, to see these images from Yanomami land gives us the human perspective of every single thing that this monster did to us in his government. Go to the next, please. Deforestation increased almost 60% during his administration, with more than 40,000 kilometers square of forest lost in 4 years. It's something like the Switzerland, a whole Switzerland destructed of forests in the middle of the Amazon. We lost more than $3 billion in environmental fines that the government let expire or even unilaterally suspended, and with no inspection on official presence in the Amazon region, organized crime flourished in the Amazon. And I think the cases of Bruno Pereira and Don Phillips, their murders last year, were quite indicative of the situation in some parts of the Amazon. In some parts, you have the organized crimes, you have mafias, you have drug cartels controlling some areas, and it's something that is still very dangerous to indigenous and environmental defenders in that region. Go to the next, please. Well, it's quite hard to say something after that, but well, Lula gives us another chance. Hopefully, luckily, he won the last election in Brazil last year, and he put environmental protection in the forefront of its government. So, for example, the first travel that he did after winning election was going to the COP27 in Egypt to speak with Brazilian representatives, civil society representatives in the conference, talking with international representatives, John Kerry, for example, representatives for European Union from other countries. So he's quite clear that at this government, at this administration, he wants to highlight the environmental issue in his project. So you have a promise of a cross-cutting approach, of a transactional approach to environmental in the government structure. For example, we now have not only the Ministry of Environment, we have the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples, which is something new to us. It's a new ministry. We have secretaries and departments related to environmental and climate change issues in others ministries. You have a green transition department in the Ministry of Economy. You have a green economy department also in the Ministry of International Trade and Development. You have the new department to combat environmental crimes in the Ministry of Justice. So we have a lot of the environmental issues not concentrated in the Ministry of Environment, but it's spread over the structure of the federal government in Brazil. Of course, the return of Marina Silva to the ministry is something huge to us, not only because of what she did on the last time she were in the government, but also because she represents the most progressive view of environmental issues in Brazil. She wants to discuss not only decrease of deforestation, she wants to zero deforestation. She wants to set up an NDC for Brazil in the Paris Agreement, aligned with the objective of 1.5 degrees Celsius limit to global warming. So she represents most of the hope that we have, of the green hope that we have in his government, comes from her presence. And a big promise that this new government has offered is to end all deforestation in the Amazon and other biomes in Brazil until 2030. So we have 8 years, almost 8 years to go to zero all deforestation rates in Brazil, which is something historical if it happens. And the reconstruction must deal with these 3 fronts of destruction in the Bolsonaro era: the legal, institutional, political, and social environmental. Go to next, please. Legal, institutional reconstruction, budget recomposition for IBAMA. This is crucial because, as I said, IBAMA were almost destroyed in the Bolsonaro era. So one of the first issues that Lula set up in the beginning of his government was to do a budget recomposition for IBAMA. For example, one of the sources of resources of economic resources for IBAMA was the resumption of international funding, which was something that Bolsonaro has frozen in his administration. So Lula, he restituted the Amazon Fund, which is an international fund set up by Norway and Germany in Brazil in 2010 exactly. And the last 4 years, this fund was frozen because Bolsonaro wanted to use the money for other things not related to the protection of the forests. So after Lula got into the government, the first thing that he did was to reconstitute the Amazon Fund, talk with Norway and Germany to liberate the resources, and then recompose the budget for IBAMA. But there's still a lot of things to do. He needs to repeal the infra-legal reforms implemented by Bolsonaro, because these infra-legal reforms, they weaken a lot of the environmental laws in Brazil. So the repeal is tantamount that he needed to do. The demilitarization of government structure. This is a more challenging point because the military still has some role to play in the context of the Amazon. So this point Lula government is doing more gradually, but it's still a point that must be faced. And the resumption and update of the federal plan to combat deforestation in the Amazon, because with a rate of more than 10,000 kilometers square annually, destruction is something unsustainable. If we continue in this rate in the next decade, we will reach the tipping point in the Amazon, and then the forest will be destructed, no matter what we did. Go to the next, please. Political reconstruction. Having Lula in the federal government is important because in Congress we have the agribusiness interest even stronger in this legislature. Their caucus is something like 40 to almost half of the Chamber of Representatives in Brazil, and almost in more than half of the Senate sittings are associated with agribusiness interests in Brazil. So we have a legislative power that are interested in easing environmental restrictions to continue the deregulation that Bolsonaro began. For this reason, having Lula in the federal government is important as a break. So these laws, this easing of environmental laws will not pass, at least in theory, without the support of the federal government itself. And this is something that still worries us because Lula is known as a negotiator, a skillful negotiator, and he's realist. So if he have other issues that he needs to address, for example, in the economy front, which is important to us right now, one of the worries that we have is that maybe he will try some compromise with agribusiness sector, which can result, as in the Dilma Rousseff government, can result in some flexibilization of environmental laws in Brazil and this administration. For this reason, in this perspective, I think 2 points are important as support for us in the environmental front. First, the political protagonism of indigenous groups is something new to us. We have represented not only the Ministry of Indigenous People, but we have representatives in Congress of indigenous origin. So having them align with environmental positions, align with environmental protection projects is important in favor of a green agenda in Congress. Having them is important, but most important to us in the more strategic perspective is the reapproaching of Brazil with Europe, United States, and other Western powers. We think that their support, their signals to us some how can I say? Sorry. This international support can ease the Lula work here in setting up some environmental and climate action projects, because he can say, wow, they're asking us abroad about the situation. We need to do our homework. So having this international pressure still, or international support for environmental and climate action in Brazil is still quite important to convince the Congress to do something. Go to the next, please. In social environmental reconstruction, tantamount urgent resumption of demarcation of new indigenous land and environmental conservation units. Bolsonaro froze all process during his administration. So he didn't create any new indigenous land or environmental conservation unit. Lula has already said that he wants to do this. He wants to create new areas. But again, we need pressure. We need support from the international community to have more to have a more favorable situation domestically in this point. The Yanomami crisis is an opportunity for the government to prioritize the protection of indigenous rights. It's something that Lula is already doing. He's using this crisis to say, no, we cannot allow any kind of mining in indigenous lands. We cannot allow any invasion of these areas. And he's pressuring state governors to do so in the region. So he's using this crisis as an opportunity to move forward with this agenda. The recovery of social participation within environmental governance, he has restored last week. He has restored the CONAMA, the Environmental National Council, at the original setup with 150 people, broad representatives of civil society organizations. And one obstacle that is new to us, and it's new to Lula because it was not an issue during his first government, is the presence of organized crime. It's a new actor, is a new player in the Amazon context, and we don't know how to approach this. How we can provide some safety to the indigenous communities? How can we protect the borders against invasions of drug cartels or other criminal groups? And we have our own national criminal groups, our own national criminal cartels, and they also are having some time in the Amazon in the last years. So how we can face this problem is something that we still don't have clear yet. It's still not clear to us. Go to the next, please. Well, what we expect. We see the path to zero deforestation. It's possible, but it will be long and tortuous. It will be something that it's something like we need to change 5 centuries of behavior, of seeing the Amazon as something that we can dispose of, and change it to something that, no, we need to protect the forest. We need to do something to maintain and restore it. So it's quite a culture change that in 8 years it will be quite hard to do. Local political and economic elites will be an obstacle to environmental action in the Amazon. For example, almost all the governors in the Amazon region are supporters of Bolsonaro. Only one governor, the governor of Pará, it's kind of allied to Lula. It's not on the same party, but it's still he campaigned in favor of Lula in the last election. But almost all other governors are opposition. And in the municipal level, you have mayors that it's the same issue. They are most related to Bolsonaro project of destruction. How to deal with this situation at the local level, it will be something challenging to the government. Again, political struggles in the Congress. We have a majority composed of right-wing or agribusiness representatives. How to deal with this composition of Congress? How to compromise with them? Because without compromise, Lula won't approve any new project or any new project that depends on congressional approval. A new and more ambitious indices to the Paris Agreement is something that we know that the government is working on. And a possible COP30 in Belém do Pará in 2025, which Lula promised during last COP. And I think it will be presented in the next COP, maybe approved in Dubai in next November. And of course, we must say about our January 6th, which is the January 8th in Brazil, which is the last attempted coup of Bolsonarism supporters in Brasilia. It's quite interesting because if you see, and the investigations are leading to this point, the financiers, the people who finance the manifestations, the aggression, the invasion of Brasilia last January, we have a lot of people from the agribusiness that supported financially and politically these groups. So we see something like the anti-democracy movement is aligning itself with the anti-environmentalist movement. So environmental action in Brazil must relate to the defense of democracy. We are facing the same enemies. Those who profit from the destruction of the Amazon are the same that supported these groups, that supported the most reactionary parts of Bolsonaro agenda. Those are the same enemies. So to face these two big challenges, we need to face it articulated. We cannot see two problems unrelated. They are related. We are dealing with the same kind of mindset that sees democracy and the environment as something that you can dispose of. That's all. Again, I'm sorry for the English, for the broken English, but I think that it summarizes a bit of what we experienced in Brazil over the last 4 years and what we expect to experience, expect to build over the next 4.
Thank you so much, Bruno. That was incredible. So much to digest, such a complex situation. When you succeed, the rest of the planet succeeds. We are all rooting for you, but we know it's a long road ahead. I have so many questions, and I do want to leave space for other people. So I'll start just with one, which is a bit complicated question. I love this analogy, which is probably common there: beef bullets and Bibles. And I think a lot of us don't understand the nuts and bolts of what's going on in the Amazon. I understand that there's a lot of deforestation for the cattle industry. Bullets, I get that. I don't know about the Bibles. And is there, in trying to transform that tendency of agriculture and, deforestation for the cattle industry, are there alternatives that are being promoted? And how can you give people alternatives in terms of a livelihood? What is being developed in other aspects of the economy that can help detract people from the deforestation? I have so many questions, but I just thought, okay, I'll start with that one. And please, if you would like to ask Bruno a question, yes, we already have hands up in the queue. So,
well, the Bible, it's something quite curious. We have a lot of evangelical presence in some parts of the Amazon, and they have quite a missionary approach to some indigenous groups. And they see the indigenous groups not like Bolsonaro in the sense of, no, they are people that we can ignore, but they see the indigenous peoples as the people that we need to save, and that we need to save from their primitive thinking, their primitive religion. So especially the evangelical community sees the Bolsonaro approach to the Amazon in this sense. No, we are entering the Amazon, we are bringing the word of the Lord to these communities, and we are saving them from their primitive thinking. So it's almost a practical approach. Since these people, the agribusiness and the armed people are there, so we go there to make our way, to save some souls and bring them to the Christ party. So it's quite practical, but the evangelical issue is more prominent in the urban areas of Brazil, especially the poorest ones. In Rio de Janeiro, for example, we have in several communities several evangelical churches established, and their approach is quite similar to the approach of some evangelical churches in the United States. So they say the changes, especially the progressive project, as something that they are endanger the traditional values of the family, of Christ, of the church, and we need to protect them. So it's more prevalent here in the urban areas, but in the Amazon we have this perspective. About practices to suppress deforestation, it's important to highlight some issues. For example, the most of the deforestation that happens in the Amazon are not related to small farmers. They are related to big ones, to the big companies. We are talking with
and cattle industry, or is it another? Yes,
is the same. We are not talking with small farmers. We're talking with big players. We're talking with I don't know how they call itself in the United States. The JBS is a cattle is a beef enterprise of Brazil. So how the issue is not to offer something. No, they are small farmers that we need to show how they can produce, how they can maintain themselves with practice that protect the Amazon. These are people that know very well that you can continue to produce, you can continue to grow without destructing a single tree. They know it, but it's cheaper to continue to deforest, to destruct, because investing in recovery of land, of degraded land, is expensive. For them, it's easier, it's cheaper to continue to destruct new lands, destructing new areas of the forest.
We have Bruce who's got his hand up and would like to ask you a question.
Bruno, thank you very much. I learned a great deal in the last hour, and I have some comments feeding off what you said, and then a question. First of all, about the evangelicals, we have many of the same things. It was kind of sad to hear your story because it reminded us again of what we went through during the last 5 years or so. It was hard but important to listen to from that standpoint. And as far as the evangelicals are concerned, it seems as though we have to talk about, if we are good Christians, we have to be good stewards of the earth, of the land that God gave to us. And it seems to me that has to be a strong narrative in the United States and Brazil and elsewhere where we're confronted with that missionary approach. You said that Bolsonaro, like the one I don't like to name in the United States, said he was the one who could solve all the problems. And he had a chance, and as you said, he didn't solve all the problems. And a challenge for us in the United States, and I imagine also in Brazil, is to demonstrate that there are others who really will do a better job. And we're trying to do that with Biden-Harris administration in the United States with mixed success. There's a new report out that suggests in some of our places where there's a lot of skepticism that it remains, and that we have a chance. Remains to be seen what we can do. And I imagine Lula is in the same situation, trying to deliver. Now, question. The World Bank leader, David Malpass, said, I'm out of here. I'm leaving in the middle of June. Yay. And at where you were, I imagine you were there in Egypt, there was talk about how there's a necessity for those multilateral banks to change their practices to make it easier for countries in the global south to get the work done that they need to. And I'm wondering if that also is something that is an option for Brazil, coupled with that goal that the United Nations Paris Agreement has now to conserve 30% of its land by 2030. And I'm wondering if there are any success stories. You said deforestation. Are there some success reforestation stories in Brazil?
Great question.
Yes, the international finance is something that we need urgently, because Bolsonaro left the government in quite an economic distress in Brazil. So the Bolsonaro and the pandemic left the government in distress. So we don't have much budget to do all these things that we need to do. And the Lula administration is looking at international funds, at international sources of any help to allow him to do something in the near time, more immediately. One example is the Amazon Fund. The Amazon Fund is, I don't recall exactly how much money. I think it's something like $4 or $5 billion over the last decade, which may not seem much, but in our context, it's quite much. It's something that is a resource that is quite important to us to not only finance the government actions against deforestation, but also to finance projects of private enterprises, of civil society enterprises related to conservation and reconstruction of the forests. We have some projects that were supported by the Amazon project before the Bolsonaro era that helped us to contain the deforestation rate. So we know there's a way. We know there's a way. We did it 10 years ago. Our challenge is to reconstitute what we lost and see what we need to do new in terms not only of public policy, but also of resources. Because 10 years ago, we had a different situation in fiscal terms. Now you are in a bad shape. So we need more money. In this sense, having international support, not only from donors, Europeans or United States, but also the multilateral institutions is important. Is something that I see the government, the Lula government, wanting, looking for, and working hard to get.
And it does help if the head of the World Bank is not a climate denier. Thank you for that thoughtful question, Bruce, and interesting response. I think Inga is also in the queue. She would like to ask a question.
Hi, Bruno. Thank you for an incredibly interesting talk. And it's just encouraging to see that there's a new government in Brazil, and our fingers are all crossed and all kinds of support that Lula and his supporters are able to make those changes. One question I have, I'm a bit like Bruce. I'm, of course, also thinking of the parallels with the US as well and the kind of extremes that we have. I'm just wondering if you could sketch out for us a little bit where the public lands on this. Obviously, you have kind of Bolsonaro hardcore, but there must be people in the middle. I mean, how informed are a lot of ordinary Brazilians about what's happening in the Amazon? Are they concerned? Is it something that has a big spectrum of opinions, or does it fall in sharp extremes? People who say, yes, we must remediate, we must stop the damage, and those who, don't think there's damage. I would think there's a group in the middle, but I'd be very interested in hearing from you about what that's like. Thank you again.
Good question. We worked over the government of Bolsonaro government to deal with this middle group, how to sensibilize them, how to get them closer to the situation of the Amazon, to inform them, to educate them. But it's a curious situation. We had some polls done since, I think, 2019, 2020, that says that the majority of the Brazilian people care for the Amazon, are worried about the situation and wanted to end deforestation, something like 55 to 60%. But we feel that it's still not an issue, the most important issue for them when they decided their vote. So it's something funny, because most people fall in the ideological battle. No, I know that Bolsonaro is not doing well in the Amazon, but better him than Lula. He's a thief. He's a communist. He wants to destroy our families. He wants to close our churches. So it's hard to deal with this radicalism. We spent the 4 years of Bolsonaro government working to inform the Brazilian society. We feel that the majority of our people are related to our cause, but it's still not an issue in their heart when they decided who they vote for.
So do they have the same kind of fanatical supporters like Trump has in the United States, that are still holding out, denying the elections? What do they say about Bolsonaro being in Florida? Do they want him to be extradited? I mean,
I think one crucial difference, still a difference between Trump and Bolsonaro, is a party structure. Bolsonaro was an outsider, and he kept an outsider during his government. He didn't have a party. So now, when he went to Florida in the end of his administration, he left his supporters alone. His supporters were the people that stormed the Brasilia in January 8th. But Bolsonaro didn't left a party structure. So we don't have the same allegiances, the party allegiances that Trump has in the United States. We don't have governors that said, no, the last election was robbed. Lula robbed the election. Bolsonaro is the duly elected president.
well,
And
one
Bolsonaro
blessing.
and Bolsonaro himself is a curious character, because much people still don't know what the hell he wanted going to Florida in the end of his administration. and why he still there. We have his wife returned earlier, she's here, she's doing his work, but we still don't know what exactly is his job, is his game staying in Florida. Even his supporters are questioning this, especially now. We are at the end of February, and Bolsonaro is still in Florida. His sons that are here, we have a senator and a congressman of the Bolsonaro family. They don't know how, when he will return, how he will return, and this gives it gives us a reason to think what is the goal, what is his goal in this structure, in this game. But I think the great difference is the party structure. Bolsonaro still don't have this in Brazil, still don't have this party allegiances. So his party, the party that he competed last election, you have some members that are approaching Lula. They are beginning to talk to Lula to make some kind of composition.
That's positive. I think Angela has been waiting to ask you a question. I'd like to give the floor to her.
Yeah, I had sort of the same kind of a question that Inga had, but you know, your presentation was kind of we were at a high point with Lula, and then we slipped down to Bolsonaro. And I was just wondering, what do the normal voters think about Bolsonaro, the destruction of the Amazon, or is that not an issue inside of Brazil politics?
I think that's a point. The last decade was quite stressful for Brazilians. We had political and economic instability. So for the people, the most important issues were those related to the economy. How I can get a job, how I can get to support my family, how to get food, how to get the basic things. And especially in the context of the pandemic, which highlighted the situation to points that we didn't experience in 30 years, in cases of poverty, of misery, of famine. So environment was not exactly an issue in the general elections debate. They were not discussing this at the center. Of course, the situation in the Amazon was discussed, but in a marginal sense. For example, when we were approaching the day of the election, the issues were not the environment or how Bolsonaro helped to bring the Yanomami people in almost to the point of genocide. We were discussing communism versus families, church.
Wow.
The radicalism was still is a challenge to us, how to approach this issue, how to discuss this issue in this context of radicalism. Because radical people don't want to talk about this hard truth.
And I suppose they still have representation. They didn't within your government. It's still not overwhelmingly Lula representation.
Yes.
I'd like to ask about your indigenous representation. And within the Senate and your Congress, and in the ministry, are there Yanomami? You have Tikuna, Guarani? What is the makeup and what kind of power do they have? Are they fighting for land rights? Are they fighting for, stewardship of the areas where they live, economic viability. Can you tell us a little bit about that segment of the government and how it's looking going forward under Lula's leadership?
Okay. The indigenous caucus it's still very small. We are talking about 3 or 4 representatives in the
Which
the House
groups
of
are they from?
Representatives. Guajajara from Maranhão, Guarani from São Paulo. I cannot remember
Any
the
Amazonian groups, Ticuna or
no.
no?
Their main task is land. They want to restore land rights. They want to approach the government to go forward to the demarcation of new lands. This is an issue that they are putting most pressure on. And most of this group is talking with the new ministry. So it's quite an articulated approach. The minister itself, Sonia Guajajara, is one of the representatives elected inside this group. So you have this connection between the Indigenous Caucus and the Ministry of Indigenous People. I think the most urgent task for them is to support the setup of this new ministry, because it's been built from the zero. You need to define all the structures, redefine how the government deal with indigenous issues. So we are in the middle of these changes, and they are seeing these changes. They are trying to support the setup of this new ministry. And I think if they cannot change votes, for example, they are not a group very large to tip the balance against or in favor of any project. Having a congressional seal is important, because it's power. It gives them more legitimacy to go, for example, to the climate conference in Dubai in next November, to talk about these issues, allow them to discuss these issues more freely and with more authority here in Brazil. So
Like in the United States, our Secretary of the Interior is she's a Native American, Holland.
See, yes.
It helps.
Yes. Because it gives possibilities, which is something that indigenous peoples didn't have up until recently. To have these players to talk abroad, to try to sensibilize, to align with itself. So having this congressional seal is important, because it gives legitimacy, gives authority. But at the same time, if you see the agribusiness caucus, we're talking about 300 in a universe of 450 representatives. So it's a very unfair battle between the two groups.
Internally, but it can also, as you said, it can bring in external investment, international recognition. If they manage to pull off COP30, and the lead up to it will be extremely advantageous to the cause. I'm wondering if Sam is so immersed in these issues, I think he has followed them more closely. Do you have any pressing questions that you could ask?
I guess the one question I did have would be, so I think what we've seen is the first month, we've seen a 61% decrease in deforestation year over year from January to January. I guess what has triggered that? Is that just kind of a return of enforcement, or is it new policies? Like, is it just fulfilling what was absent under Bolsonaro? I mean, how do you have such a strict 61% turnaround within basically 30 days of taking power? I mean, because you always think about politics being a slow and intricate process. But I think in this case, we see the opposite happening.
I think it's quite early to say that this decrease was related to Lula government. Last year was a point way off the curve in retrospect regarding deforestation. In the lead up to the election, there was a sense in the Amazon that, okay, this is the moment. If Bolsonaro doesn't win, we need to destroy what we can destroy, because 1st January on, we won't do it. So all of from January to December, all the monthly rates of deforestation were record. So I think most of this decrease is because of this the exceptionality of last year. Last year was so way of the normal patterns that, again, Bolsonaro lost, the situation normalized, and deforestation decreases a little bit.
Okay, I know we have to end pretty soon, but I do have a question, which nuts and bolts of how it works in these forests. If they've been deforested, if the forests have been knocked down, is there any way to reclaim that land? And I know that the one blessing about the tropical forests is they grow much quicker than, let's say, our forests in Finland, or old growth forests in California. What kind of measures can be taken to reclaim that land and let the forest regrow?
Yes, in fact, we in the regional NDC of Brazil, we had a goal of reconstitute, I think 30 million hectare. I don't know how to measure this hectares in acres of forests up until 2030. So we have experiences of recovery of forests. One point that recent studies showed us is that the new forest, it's weaker than the old forest in its capacity of absorb carbon. Mm-hmm. So yes, the forest it recovered quicker, but the new forest is still not the same as the old one. Mm-hmm. When we talk about carbon absorption.
Sequestration. I didn't know that. Does somebody else have a question they would like to ask? Liz, do you want me to read it, or do you want to unmute? I think she may want me to read it. When Liz Blackburn, who's in China, asks, when faced with hunger and homelessness, it makes sense the people of Brazil are more focused on the economy. We sincerely hope that the political landscape changes quickly, empowering the people to secure and then act on deforestation and climate change. So grateful you could join and educate us on your efforts. Hope to see you again. So that was from Liz. I think all of us echo that. This has been a fantastic presentation. I have learned so much. I think everybody has. I think we could go on for hours asking questions and learning more, because this is unfortunately nobody was able to join us from Brazil today from our DA group, and there is an active DA chapter in Brazil. But we will continue to follow the issues, to hope for progress, because it not only benefits the Amazon and Brazil, but of course, the rest of the globe will prosper. Thank you so much for your time, Bruno, and
Thank you
thank
for the
you
opportunity.
everybody for
Thank you.
joining us today.
Thank you for the
We'll
opportunity.
end the recording now.
It's a pleasure to talk. It's always important to talk about these issues. We are in a moment that we need international support because of the budgetary restrictions, and the support is important to us to go ahead and rebuild what Bolsonaro destroyed, all the chaos that he left to us.
Well, we felt like that coming out of the former administration in the US too. And I have to say, you know, after he withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, all the policies that he enacted, and now look what Biden has achieved. It's not perfect, but within the first 2 years of his administration, he's enacted legislation that is unprecedented in US history, $370 billion going to mitigation of climate change and other environmental justice. So we are making steps, you know, one foot in front of the other, and we certainly wish for the same kind of success for Brazil, and in partnership with the Biden-Harris administration. Thank you.